Way back in the day, past the Middle Ages, in the other side of the world, city dwellers brewed beer when fresh water was unavailable. The alcohol just made it safer, and they've been perfecting beer guts ever since. Before Prohibition, America had thousands of breweries brewing diverse beers, and after Prohibition was repealed, only the largest had survived, for they could afford to brew near-beer products in the meantime. Yuengling, for example, boasts the oldest American brewery, started in 1829. And they actually built a dairy next to the brewery to stay afloat. Then, once World War II came along, breweries were brewing lighter, more universal beers to be sold anywhere and everywhere in the country. The times are changing back now, though, now that local and sustainable breweries are emerging. Brewmasters intent on brewing their kind of beer in their kind of way are succeeding across the country. Mainstream universal beers aren't cutting it anymore. We're Americans. We're picky. And we're developing a taste for local craft beer. Lafayette's People's Brewing Company opened back in 2009, and they offered to help me as I journey through how to make craft beer.
Abel came in early and did the mash in, which is basically milling the grains. That's why there was grain all over the floor. And we apparently had a torn bag this morning, so there's a lot more grain than usual. That's our 2-roller mill, so all the grain goes in there and then gets milled, which is just barely cracked enough to expose the starchy centers, and then it goes up the auger and into the mash tun. That little pill-shaped pad with the pipe going out of the backside, that's the Gerst hydrator. That's it's just basically, it wraps that tube and it's got a bunch of holes in it, so it sprays water out in every direction, and the malt falls through that, and it hydrates there so that we don't get dry clumps down in the mash. So I think there's about 1,400 pounds of grain in there on top of a screen filled with water at 150 to 155 degrees. This beer particularly is, I think our target is 153, which is sort of medium body. If you go higher, you get more body. You go lower, you get less body. So this will sit for a half an hour, and that's the mash. The enzymes that are naturally in the malt will convert the starches over to sugars, and that's where we'll get our sweetness and fermentable base. Also, there are darker malts in there. So this is a base malt. Has very little color. Also has very little flavor, but it gives us our alcohol base. So we put a lot of this in to get the alcohol content we want, and then we put the specialty malts in with the colors and the flavors to get the colors and flavors. So that's starch conversion or sugar conversion. Starch is 2 sugars. Now we wait for a few minutes.
Okay.
In about 10 minutes, we're going to start pulling what we call sweet wort off of there. Sweet wort is the converted sugar liquid. And then we make bitter wort out of that by adding hops to it, if that makes sense.
And you're rinsing the grain? Is that what I heard?
Yeah. It'll have all kinds of husk and haze to it. And right now we're recirculating it back over the mash so that we can clarify that before we send it to the kettle. So this is called the Grant box. The Grant box.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's because of a guy named Grant who came up with it.
So once it gets clear, then it goes into the other tank.
Then we'll start going to the kettle. We call this the Borloff, which is like recirculation. And then when we start going to the kettle, we'll rinse with fresh water, which we call sparging, and that'll rinse more sugars and colors and things out. This vessel doesn't hold nearly enough liquid to fill this, so we sparge it. And they do that on purpose.
What happens if it's too acidic?
It doesn't taste good. Now we're going to add 50 mils of phosphoric acid.
And that 50 milliliters of phosphoric acid will change the pH by 0.3?
Should bring it down, yeah. Now we're going to start sending wort over the kettle. So the temperature we're shooting for here, we're starting to sparge. So we're going to keep running water as we transfer over the grain to get like every bit of fermentable sugar we can out. And then we're trying to hit 168 to stop enzyme activity.
Okay. And for the most part, all the malt stays in this one. Right?
Yeah, we're going to get a little bit through this part of the process, not a huge amount. But that's what the whirlpool's for. Because we don't filter our beers. To get out all the solid matter, the whirlpool just uses centrifugal force to get out all the solids. Basically, as it's spinning, all the solids will pile up in like a cone-shaped little mountain in the bottom. And then we let it rest, everything settles down, and then we drain the liquid off. So we're left with a nice pile.
So after this process, once it all goes in there, then it just cooks there for a while?
About an hour and a half.
Okay.
Once we start to boil. And that's where we start our hop additions.
Okay.
For beer stability, bitterness, flavor, deliciousness, right?
And hops are put in like kernel form, or the hops, are they put in like through kernel, like as a kernel, or?
They're actually processed in the pellets.
Okay.
But basically they're processed wet, so they're not like dried out or anything, just compressed. And then once they hit water, they puff back up and look like flowers again.
And then you drain those out?
Sort of. They kind of stay in there. Well, we spit out the plant matter, but a lot of like the flavor and smaller particles are still in it. And then, like with this beer, we'll dry hop it. So we'll add straight pellets into after primary fermentation done. And then that'll fall out to the yeast. But once again, we filter it out. So basically, when we transfer from the kettle to the whirlpool, we use this system. Yeah, after it's worked, then it all goes through that. And then we'll rearrange it to go out of the whirlpool through the heat exchanger to the fermenter.
Bunch of tubes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Piping.
And then once it's in the whirlpool and gets out all the chunks and whatnot,
Right.
then it goes into one of these other tanks?
Yeah, into the fermenter. It'll be going into this one.
Okay. And then it'll just stay in here for
A few weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. And the fermenter to the bright tank, it's got all the properties of beer. It's got carbonation and all that a little bit. It's kind of cloudy while it's still in there. So to get like a clear, crisp product, we send it over to the bright tank. We're going to add any extra gas that we're going to need to get a nice head on it. It basically just makes it prettier.
Okay.
That's all.
Why is that tank cold looking?
It's crashed. That beer is sitting at 34 degrees, and it ages that way, and the yeast falls out, and it falls bright. So it allows us to get the yeast off the bottom, and then just age the beer and mesh the flavors.
The biggest complications with brewing?
Complications? Time and temperature is really everything. You get the right temperatures and the right times, and everything works out pretty well.
So we're just doing a gravity reading.
Yeah.
See how much alcohol we get out of it. So that's like a thermometer and a bobber at the same time. It's got lead in the bottom, so it'll go up and down. And we've got 3 different ones, depending on so when we start off, there's like 18 gravities, and now we're at like 5.5. We're gonna get it down to about 3.
Okay.
That'll give us our alcohol by volume and like how much residual sugars we'll have for flavor. Yeah, this is Notorious BIP.
Now, is it a prerequisite to have a beard, or does it just make the brewing better?
It may be a result. I don't know.
Okay.
Keeps beer off your t-shirts.
Beer is essentially made from water, malted barley or another type of starch, hops, and yeast. However, crazy complex biochemical reactions take place in between to make what we know and love, beer. Just an overview, the water can have a great impact on the type of beer brewed. For instance, Russia's soft water lends to a better regional pale ale like Pilsner or Krell. Lafayette has hard basic water, which could be more suited for a heavier beer like a stout. Lafayette Brewing Company actually brews a popular Digby Stout as a seasonal option for St. Patrick's Day. The starchy barley malts ferment into sugars and provide the alcohol base for beer. How the starches are treated depends on the type of beer. Roasting times, temperatures, and types of starch all change the flavor and alcohol content. And simply darker malts create darker beers. Once the barley has been soaked and fermented, instead of throwing it away, breweries like Peoples often sell it to farmers. The malt barley needs to be heated before fed to cows, but other than that, it's a great source of recyclable food for farmers. If a brewer was to make a gluten-free beer, though, he would use sorghum instead of the barley malts. Hops are made to flavor and preserve beer. Hops are a sort of vine-like pod that are broken down into pellets to easily flavor beer. Hops provide a bitter flavor to balance out the malty sweetness, and they're usually measured in IBUs, or International Bitterness Unit scales. The more IBUs, the more bitter and herbal the beer will taste. Yeast is a vital component to brewing. Yeast metabolizes the sugars from the barley and produces alcohol and CO2. Basically, once the barley-flavored water is ready, the yeast makes beer. Different yeasts make different beers, like ales and lagers. A sort of economical fact is that brewers can cultivate their own yeasts and recycle them. One yeast can actually be usable for up to 10 cycles of brewing before it mutates. That recycle and cutoff also helps maintain a consistent flavor among all the beers. Furthermore, this leftover brewer's yeast is high in protein and vitamins and minerals and can be used in vegetarian cooking as a health supplement. Now for some boozy opinions.
Well, I really enjoy craft beers, and I've managed to kind of open my father's eyes to the whole thing. I don't think he, really was aware of what all was out there. And we actually started home brewing last year because I found the process very interesting. You can kind of be creative. I mean, I don't bake, but I can get into brewing beer. It's kind of interesting and challenging. You play in your seasonal beers, and it's been kind of a bonding father and son type deal. So, you can kind of plan out a seasonal, and that's real cool. And then it finally matures. It's ready for football season, basketball season, and all year season. Lately, I've been experimenting with my first wheat beer for the summer, and my dad's got an orange IPA in the works that I think is going to be pretty good. The thing about macro brewed beers, or mass produced beers, they all taste the same. They're kind of one note. I think they really fall flat and kind of do a disservice to beer drinkers out there. You can get a lot more variety and flavor from microbrewed beers. I'm kind of thinking beer is the new wine. You're not limited to red and white. You can get hoppy. You've got IPAs, wheat beers, various ales, ambers, bogs, shrimps, stouts, shrimp scampi, shrimp kebab, shrimp gumbo, porters. I like shrimp and I like beer, but I love craft beer.
Kathleen, and since you asked me about local beers, I really like to go out and have a few. They taste great. They're fresh. And they're, since they are made locally, they're not coming from elsewhere. And I know who makes it. And I know the quality that they put into it. And they have good company at their breweries, too. And also, one of the most important things I'm finding is that it supports the local economy.
I drink a lot of IPAs, big flavorful beers.
The favorite thing about craft beer is, the wide variety and selection of stuff. You get all different types of varieties. You get a stout that's made with oatmeal, and then you get a hoppy beer made with local grown hops, which is a nice variety where your regular old lagers are the same old watered down beer.
Honestly, I just really don't like beer, so I don't know what I like. But I do like, good Newcastle Guinness every once in a while. It's about as beery as I go. If I have a hangover, rather than come in and get a Bloody Mary, I get Guinness with bloody mix in it, because I can't do the vodka with a hangover. Guinness with Bloody Mary mix is really good.
So is your main problem with microbrewed beers the hops?
Yeah, probably. As long as it's not very hoppy, then I'm good with it. But I find that most microbrewed beers are very hoppy.
So the next time you and your friends want a boozy adventure, I hope you'll think about the care and precision that goes into craft brewing and maybe try a local brew instead of a boring, mass-produced beer. But I still understand using swill for beer pong games.
All right, ready?